I would like to go a bit earlier backwards in time and looking at the construction of sacrality in modern ritual magic. And in particular, I will look at the architectural operations and spatial practices attested in written grimoires, like the Abramelin, which is a popular handbook in modern occultism for summoning and have contacts with one personal guardian angel. And I will more specifically look at the reception of the construction of sacred spaces. So this is a brief roadmap of the plan for today. And first, I will give an introduction of the Abramelin as a text and its circulation in manuscript in Europe. But then I will go immediately in at the core of my interest, that is a spatial analysis of the ritual space of the Abramelin. And I will look at this through three lenses that I've called the architectural, social, and cognitive lenses. And then I will see at what happened when the text has been transmitted to late modern occultists. More specifically, I will look at the case of Aleister Crowley practices, and then I will draw some conclusions. So the Abramelin is an European grimoire. So it is a ritual text that provides instruction on how to perform magical ceremonies that generally addresses intermediary beings such as demons and angels. More research needs to be done about its authorship and origins. There are speculations about its real author. It is attributed to Abraham von Worms, a Jewish Kabbalist who lived in Germany between the 14th and 15th century. The prologue and structure of the text share similarities with many other famous grimoires, like the Key of Solomon. A mythical figure, in this case, the Egyptian mage Abramelin, passed to Abraham from Worms the secret knowledge of magic. And then Abraham from Worms would have written down Abramelin's magical instruction into a book dedicated to his son Lamech. This literary strategy gives authority to the text and place the reader at the end of a chain of transmission of magical knowledge. The techniques and magical prescription kept in the Abramelin clearly fall into the category of what has been called rituals of apparitions, which are bodily and spatial techniques to sense the numinous presence of intermediary beings. In other terms, spirits, angels, or demons should appear in imperceptible forms in front of practitioners. But what mostly interests us is that the Abramelin is one of the most detailed grimoire in terms of instruction, entirely in written form, so avoid of any type of diagrams, on how to construct a temporary sacred architecture. Few words about the structure of the grimoire. So in book one, we have Abraham von Worms' dedication to his son Lamech, and the story of Abraham's meeting Abramelin and Abramelin's teaching. Book two is divided in 10 chapters and present a list of magical remedies that I won't go so much into the details, but for example, chapter 10 concerns to disappear from the sight of an enemy. And then book three, which is at the core of the focus of my attention, is where we have the technical instructions on how to contact the guardian angel and summon a different rank of spirits. But also it gives important instruction on how to construct the architecture of Abramelin, so the locations for the ritual space. The fourth and final book instead presents a series of word squares that are supposed to be used during the last part of the ritual, which is the conjurations of good and bad spirits. So, as I said before, more philological research needs to be done in order to clarify the origins of the text and its authorship. Although the circulation of the text in Europe after the 17th century is attested by versions in German, French, Italian, and even Swedish, in particular, the Paris manuscript became very popular in late modern occultism when MacGregor Mathers edited it in his 1898 book, the Book of the Sacred Magic of Abramelin. This version was also the one used by Aleister Crowley, one of the adepts of the Golden Dawn, to obtain knowledge and conversation with the Holy Guardian Angel. The Paris manuscript tells readers that the text was translated from Hebrew to Latin in 1458 in Venice. However, this might not be indeed the case. The earliest known manuscript was written in German, who dates 1608, and it's certain that a Brahmani was popular in Venice beginning late 16th century. I found new evidences of the Italian manuscript from a second half of 17th century, of a manuscript in Brescia kept at the Biblioteca Quiriniana, which does not claim at all that the text is a translation from Hebrew. And actually, the historian Maria Elena Loda argues that it could be a translation from a Latin codex, a lost Latin codex. This text belonged to Leopardo Martinengo da Barca, who was a very famous Italian nobleman who, with great interest in occult sciences, that collected many, many books on the topic, even the Picatrix we have, for example. And this manuscript for me is particularly important because it offers important details about the construction of ritual space that the other doesn't. So, for example, in chapter 11 of book 3, we have precise instruction about how one should arrange the place of the operation, offering even architectural indications. So, for example, one should start, and here I want to stress that the time is pretty important for my study, before the first celebration of Passover, that one should erect an altar in the middle of a clearing and a hut made of branches over it, and then should spread incense around this little hut. And then one should plant either a circular or rectangular, depending on the manuscript we are reading, hedge of beautiful and odoriferous flower that should be distant 7 steps on each side. So then these compositions, this architectonical composition, create an interior, which is made by the hut plus the altar, that should be like a temple or an oratorium, and an exterior that should be like a porch or a courtyard. However, the text, of course, also said that it's not always possible, right, to perform outdoor, and so it provides an alternative. One could also practice in one's own home and house, but one should follow certain instruction. Basically, should reproduce the same conditions as outdoor. So the oratorium in this case should have 2 windows, one facing east and the other facing west. Should have a rectangular shape. The floor should be covered with wood tablets, and one side of this room should be attached to an unroofed open loggia. So then to recreate the same spatial subdivision, a portico and an inner cell. Plus the floor should be covered with sand, uniformly spread and 3 fingers deep. However, there are process of the construction of the sacred space for the operation of a Brahmalin is articulated along 4 ritual phases. The first 3 stages each last half a year, while the first one lasts 6 days. In total, the ritual time is 18 months and 6 days, and the life of the practitioner should be adjusted to this timing, with him abandoning the routine of daily activities. During the first 3 periods, for example, the practitioner obtained the guidance of the guardian angel, consecrating himself and the location for the final stage, the conjuration of the spirit. The practitioner movement and social relation are delimited by the perimeters of the private dwelling and restricted to the people who live with him for the entire period of the ritual. During these times, rituals of purification and consecration regulate the entrance of people and objects into the prayer room and change depending on the ritual time. So, for example, in the first period, any presence that can corrupt the purity of the ritual is banished from the house. So, for example, no children or animals are allowed. And during the second time, the repetitions of ritual actions for purification and consecration increases, with additional purification even of the body before entering the ritual rooms. And in the third period, the frequency of ritual action reaches a climax, accompanied by a more structured isolation of the prayer room. And the fourth final period, which lasts 6 days, the more complex procedure of the consecration of the room, where from this moment on, none of the consecrated objects and ritual paraphernalia can leave the room, and the practitioner should enter the room only in bare feet. So after the end of the third period, the initiation is completed and the practitioner has established a relationship with the guardian angel, transforming the intellectual and spiritual state. As a result, also the sense of place change, where the practitioner also is supposed to sense different smells and different light experiences, which create a non-ordinary perception of the space. Once the ritual is concluded, however, the sacrality of the ritual space is dismissed. And for example, the location of the spirit should be incensed, and the sand that was covering the floor should be poured into a river. In order to understand the modalities of sacralization of the ritual space, in the Abramlin, my analysis focuses on 3 different levels of spatial practices that I name architectural, social, and cognitive. The Abramlin, as I said before, requires a specific architectural typology, a lodge attached to a quadrangular room that is not attested in any other sources of ceremonial magic that I've been able to find. I argue that a useful analytical concept to understand the spatial organization of the ritual space is that of type. Type was introduced as an interpretative category of architecture by Quatremer de Quincy, the author of the Dictionnaire d'Architecture. And the concept of type has a great impact on architectural theory still today. According to contemporary theorists, type serves as a heuristic tool, so it does not represent a final stage of architectural form, but it is conceptual and involves a description through which it is possible to recognize the structure that constitute objects in architecture. So the type is an operation of descriptive abstractions that can be imitated. So it welcomes infinite forms in itself. And since we do not have archaeological remains, so for example, of the temple of Abramlin, but we have only written instruction, I argue that type become a powerful analytical tool to trace the architectural reception history of sacred space and ritual magic. In particular, I have identified 2 architectural types. The first one is the hut. The erection of a hut has a profound symbolic meaning. On the one hand, it is associated with the Feast of Tabernacles, also known as the Feast of Booths, according to which the ritual of Abramlin is set, which commemorate the Sukkot. The Sukkot is a reenactment of the construction of the shelters under which the people of Israel took refuge during the escape from Egypt. And this shelter had a roof of leaf and straw, showing crucial parallelism with the Abramlin's prescription. On the other hand, the hut as an architectural type was a popular type in early modern architectural treatises, which had a great influence on early modern imagination. In particular, the Renaissance myth of the primitive hut originates with the printed edition of the classical architectural treatise by Vitruvius that was first printed in 15th century. In Renaissance mind, the Vitruvian hut was translated in Christian terms. For example, Filarete represents graphically Adam after the expulsion from paradise, building a shelter out of branches and foliage. The myth of the primordial hut influenced paintings as well. For example, Emanuele Aguzzo, the historians of art, contends that in earlier painting and sculpture, the simple and modest hut echoes that of the Holy Family and should be distinguished from the Jewish traditions of the Temple of Solomon, which was made of stone. However, in the Abramlin, the hut is just a part of an articulate system of spaces which constitute the second type, the temple. The type of the temple in Abramlin has striking parallelism with contemporary architectural treatises like the Re Edificatoria of Leon Battista Alberti. Book 7 of the Re Edificatoria deals with sacred places, and in particular, chapter 4 is about the parts, forms, and figures of temples. In the first line, Alberti explained that the temple has 2 parts, a portico and an inner self. So the Renaissance type of the temple is imitated in the case also of domestic spaces hosting the operation of Abramlin. So a quadrangular room without additional corners should be chosen to be the inner self, the oratorium, and attached to one side of the room, there should be a lodge or a terrace. Alberti in this tell us that in the case of quadrangular temples, the portico can be attached just at the front facade And the worst effect in the shape will occur when not all the angles are straight. Here, I'm not suggesting that there is a straightforward line of transmission from Renaissance architectural treatise to the grimoire of Abramelin. With this typological analysis, I argue that there were specific architectural types, conceptual ways of arranging space that in early modern culture convey sacrality. Besides, they were not physical architecture, they were not physical models, but types, conceptual description that could be potentially reproduced anywhere temporarily in the privacy of domestic space, making them erratic and sacred spaces. This conclusion links to the social implications of the use of private and domestic spaces for the erection of circular location in early modern urban space. The political and religious guidelines regulated domestic chapels and how sacral spaces were constructed in private dwellings. The function of private chapel was to create as much as possible a powerful center of sacrality in one's own dwellings that function as a church. Hence, the topic becomes central for the Abramelin special setting. In fact, Abramelin offers practical instruction to transform a room into a private chapel. And the consecrations of these places were not the same as those churches. Indeed, the status of permanent churches was obtained through Long's rite of consecration, while private chapters received less rites of benediction. And before the Council of Trent, the only requirement for private chapels was consecrated altars that were portable altars, and therefore private altars guaranteed by extension the possibility of private chapels. But the Council of Trent limited both people who could have private chapels and the freedom in architectural design and furniture. Private chapels became almost banned after Trent. Altars should be made of masonry or stone to prevent it from being moved, and incense burns were banned, and the celebration of any rite other than Mass was forbidden. So if you observe the methods of construction and furnishing of Abramelin's oratorium in light of a Tridentine doctrine, it is certainly a heretic place. The room is not appointed by any clerical authority, but is autonomously chosen by the practitioner. Consecrations are long, they last 18 months, and movable paraphernalia and incense are employed at length. Therefore, the practitioner who possessed the Abramelin were potentially breaking the dogma and illicitly create unauthorized sacred spaces. Additionally, we should not forget that the Council of Trent prohibited the cult of the guardian angel. More specifically, the Council prohibited autonomous relationship not mediated by traditional liturgy and religion authorities with one's personal guardian angel. Therefore, the arrangement of private chapel for unmediated rituals of apparitions of one personal guardian angel would have been very suspicious in light of ecclesiastical authority and banned as deviant sacred spaces according to the dogma. These states of fact and the temporary of the ritual space made me think of the Temple of Abramelin as an heterotopia. The concept was introduced by Foucault, as we know already in 1967. And according to Foucault, heterotopias are both similar and different from utopias, since heterotopias are both imaginal and real. The typology of the temple and the hut are indeed conceptual, so they are images conveyed through text ekphrastically, but at the same time, they potentially can be actualized through ritual practice in the secrecy of one's own dwelling. There are three features of heterotopia that I found relevant in studying the Abramelin. First, heterotopia are places hosting deviant actions and behavior. So the private cult of the guardian angel is practiced in unauthorized domestic chapels against the dogma imposed by the Council of Trent, creating a deviant center of sacrality. Heterotopia exists also in relation to temporal discontinuity, and this is particularly interesting for the way in which this sacred space is constructed and dismissed. After a conjuration, as I said before, the ritual space is completely dismissed, and the heterotopias also have the capacity to be simultaneously isolated and penetrable. So they presuppose an ambivalent system of rituals related to opening and closing and entry-exit. The Abramelin requires long and complex procedures of purification of the body and ritual tools before entering the prayer room. So this shows that the active role of the body in constructing isolation and permeability in society, the adjustment of the body condition to sensing sacrality of space, its non-ordinarity, adapt to the timing of the ritual, separating the practitioner from daily social activity and modifying also the permeability of the family house. According to Birgit Meyer, who introduced the notion of sensational forms are bodily techniques that tunes the senses and structure perception in a specific and selective manner, directing attention in a particular way and inducing openness from an amazing, extraordinary experiences. I argued that the spatial practice described in Abramelin might facilitate the experience of sensational form. During the 18 months ritual period, the practitioner ritually crosses the thresholds of the prayer room, and crossing thresholds of spatial thresholds enhance the perception of sacrality. And this argument is sustained by a recent discovery in cognitive sciences. A recent study studied the psychological effects of crossing threshold, and shows that doorways are event shift inducing location updating effects. So in other terms, humans divide their stream of perception into different events. When there is a shift in space, an alteration of the spatial condition around them. So entering a new room requires an updated event model, a sort of cognitive expenditure of energy that causes defect in memory. In the Abramelin, the event boundary of the prayer room are ritually created, signaled by the daily crossing of the chamber door, the mandatory ablution and purification required for the crossing, the modulation of lights entering the oratorium, and the use of incense and oils. All these sensational forms create an event boundary that separates the event of the family house from the event of the supernatural. Crossing repeatedly and routinely its threshold supports the non-ordinary of the event model. But what happens when we move to late modernity? And we are moving into another spatial dimensions. Aleister Crowley claimed to have obtained the goal of Abramelin, performing the ritual in an astral temple and visualizing it in his mind. He started the ritual in a physical house, and the preparation of the ritual began in an apartment in London, in 2 apartments in London. But both these apartments didn't have the features required by the Abramelin. In 1899, Crowley bought the manor of Boleskine, that is very famous among occultists, on the southeast side of Loch Ness, and adapted the southern western part of the villa according to the official instructions. So he chose a room with a bow window, through which he made a door to have access to the outside, where he built his terrace and the lodge for the spirits. At one point, he had to interrupt the ritual at Boleskine, but he continued it while he was in China. And at that time, he had problem finding the right location to perform the operation because he was traveling and moving from one place to another. Therefore, he decided to operate on an imaginary visualized places, the astral plane. And I will quote him directly from his confessions. So my plan was to transpose the astral form of my temple at Boleskine to where I was, so as to perform the invocation in it. It was not necessary for me to stay in one place during the ceremony. I frequently carried out while riding or walking. I had no difficulty in visualizing the astral plane by an effort of will. And of course, I was perfectly able to watch the results of the invocation with my astral eyes. So analyzing his confession, we can observe what the imaginal place offered to late modern practitioner. First, in Magic also, which is his theoretical summa, Crowley stated that the astral plane is located between the material plane and the spiritual plane, and that the astral plane has the same extensions and variety of the material one. So the astral form of architecture can be moved at will in different areas. So the astral body is in the same place as the material one. However, geographical distances and the immobility of physical architecture are not features of the astral plane. The material form anchors the astral one, but according to Crowley, through concentration techniques, it is possible to move the astral one at will. Third, not only was the astral form of the temple transposed to his location, but it did so while it was in movement. So this other space can be constantly created, thus constituting a different relationship with the body of the practitioner. And the physical body does not need to move through it, but this space could be carried around in his mind. And I argue that this creates a totally different scenario in terms of heterotopic spaces, because this is no more an heterotopia, which is both imaginary and real, but it's totally imaginary, and also modulate a different access to secrecy in late modern magic. Crowley indeed wrote in his confession that he lacked an appropriate social context. He didn't have the privacy and isolation that every magical practice requires. The astral temple and imaginal constructed space make it possible to perform magical action, being immersed, and I quote him, in ordinary business or social life. So the threshold of one's imagination delimits the boundary of a new sacred spaces. And we can observe also how the access to this sacred space requires a cognitive change, the acquisition of an astral body obtained through visualization training that serve to induce an altered state of perception in practitioners. So to sum up briefly, so what I aim to do, it was to develop an analysis of the construction of the sacred space in ritual magic through three lenses: architectural, social, and cognitive, that helped me to identify that there are two architectural types that conceive sacrality to the temple of Abramelin, the hut and the temple. The sacralization procedure of the ritual space and the relationship with time generates an heterotopia that modulates the relationship with society and the sacred space. And the reception of the Abramelin, the text of the Abramelin in late modern occultism, varies the form of secrecy and isolation of magical practice in society through the erection of imaginal boundaries. And thank you very much for your attention.